for last year, the financial structure, 12/31/21. So I'll have that review tomorrow, so that we will issue that. Good evening and welcome to the Budget and Finance Committee. Today is July 27, 2022. It's muted.
He wants to unmute it. You want to
Unmute.
unmute it.
Good evening and welcome to the Budget and Finance Committee. Today is Wednesday, July 27. The voting member today is to my left, Councilor at-large Anna Levy, and next official, and Council President Michael LaPlante. Pursuant Chapter 20 of the Act of 2022, this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee is being conducted both in person and via remote participation. As a reminder that persons who would like to listen or to view this meeting while in progress might either attend in person at the location above or use any of the following access locations: the Facebook Lawrence City Council page and the YouTube Lawrence City Council page. There is no minute to be approved. So before we do that, please join me for a minute for the Pledge of Allegiance. The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you, councilors, for being here. As per my schedule, I thought that this meeting was supposed to happen at 7, but based on the agenda, it's at 6:30. My apologies because I was running a little late, corresponding to the agenda. So we have one item as a new business, which is item 25122, which is the submission of fiscal year 2021 city audit by Mark Ianello, the Chief Administrator and Finance Officer, the CAFO of the City of Lawrence. So we would like to allow our CAFO to introduce the audit, and we can go from there. Thank you.
Yes, councilors. Tonight, this is last year's audit that we have. There's 3 audit reports that you have, and I have Jim Powers from Powers and Sullivan. The audit was completed by Powers and Sullivan, so we have Jim Powers here to explain the 3 reports. There's a report on the basic financial statements, there's a report on the schedule of federal awards, and then there's a management letter. And so without further ado, I'll introduce Jim Powers, and he can just give you a quick explanation and mainly a quick overview, and then take questions that you may have.
Just name and address for the record, please.
My name is James Powers from Powers and Sullivan, a CPA firm from out of Wakefield, Massachusetts. and we are engaged by the city to conduct the annual audits each year. Okay. Good evening, councilors. Thanks for having me tonight. Mark, thank you. As Mark said, my role here tonight is to kind of just go over an overview, the actual 3 reports that are required to be completed as part of the city's financial statements. And so each one of the reports are separate and have a different purpose. One of the ones is a schedule of federal awards that Mark had mentioned earlier. That report I'll go over first, if that's okay. Basically,
Yes.
the federal government, sorry.
Yes, I would like to go over each one by means. But before you go over each one, I would like to define each report, the concept of each report,
Yeah.
the purpose of it, and how you work on those results.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So the purpose of the Schedule of Federal Awards, the federal government put out what's called the Single Audit Act years ago, and they require any municipality that receives funds from the federal government, either directly from the federal government or through the Commonwealth of Mass, to report and have an audit on their funds. They have set out for each one of their grants that they award a set of compliance supplements, meaning that these are the things that the city must do in order to comply with the federal grants to make sure that you're spending the money in accordance with their regulations. They realized years ago that it was impractical for the federal government to do that audit, and so the Single Audit Act of 1986 basically went through and said, it makes sense that the firm that's doing the audit do the audit procedures on our behalf and then report back to us every year the results of those particular things. The federal government actually produces and has audit programs that CPA firms have to follow to make sure that we do what they would do, and we're just, in effect, acting as their agent and required to follow their particular rules. So it doesn't matter as much which audit firm you hire for the single audit, we all have to do the same reporting requirements as we go through. And basically what the federal government says is that any community that spends over $750,000 of federal funds in any one fiscal year is required to have what the single audit is. And obviously, the City of Lawrence last year spent about $36 million worth of federal funds. A good portion of that last year was because of COVID and the additional COVID funds that all the communities had, which added another $10 million. And so we come in and, based on their requirements, do the compliance audit for them. So you definitely were required to have that completed. And then what they do is say that we want to make sure that we have proper coverage, that we looked at the most important grants and whether or not the different grants could be riskier than others, depending on what they are. Say for school lunch grants, that's a less risky audit because it's been around for a while. The programs are set up. The school does a great job to make sure that they're in compliance as we go through, and you'd see that in the prior reports. But you also took a look at the dollar value. You also have to go through and take a look at, say, the COVID money that you spent. That's a new grant that came in. That's higher risk. So they're required, as part of our risk evaluation, is to choose that as one of the major grants. And they want to make sure, as one of the major programs that we audit, that we evaluate the risk of each one of those particular grants that you have. And then there's a selection process that we go through, and we have to audit at least 25% of the dollar value. So out of the $36 million that you spent, we have to make sure that that was covered as part of that, and it was. One of the good things about, as we evaluate this, councilors, is that we take a look, and what we're required to do is take a look at the results of last year's single audit. If we had any what's called findings in there that we question cost, or we had some findings, or you're doing things wrong, what the federal government requires us to do is to follow up on those findings. The city and our school would have to put in a corrective action plan last year. We would have to evaluate how well they did to eliminate the finding from the previous year. And what they also do is, instead of having that 25% limit, it jumps up to 40%. They make us audit more. One of the good things about Lawrence is that you had no findings last year. You had a clean report. Everything that we looked at last year, all the testing and the compliance results were in great shape. The school has a lot of the grants as you go through. Obviously, the school lunch program, Title I, special education as you go through. There's a lot of funds that normally most communities, schools dominate the amount of federal funds that are spent in any Massachusetts communities, and larger communities like yours does have a lot of school grants as we go through. And so during the year, if you take a look at the $36 million that was spent in fiscal year '21, $28 million of that was school-related. So they're the dominant fact. Similar to the prior year, all of our testing, everything we did, the school and the city did a great job in managing and those particular grants, and we had no findings relative to the operation and the compliance requirements for all of the grants. Now, like I said, we didn't look at every one, but we looked at the major funds as we went through. Council, does that kind of give you a good overview of the purpose of that particular fund? And it probably makes sense, if you had any questions on this report, up to you to address them now. If not, I could move on to the next.
No, just move on. I mean, we just want to make sure that for the purpose of transparency, that people understand each report, the purpose of it,
Yeah.
and what are how you get to that point.
Okay.
Thank you. So
Okay.
you might continue.
The next report I'd like to go over is the report on the examination of the financial statements. And basically, the purpose of this is that through Mark's office, he's responsible to account for all activity and report all activity that the city has during the year. So all the budgets, all the revenues, all the grants, all the cash in, all the cash out. Mark has a separate ledger system that records everything. And so all the information that's gleaned from all departments all feed into Mark. So the purchasing, the accounting, the acceptance of the grants, the expenditures, to make sure that there's compliance with the state laws of all of this as you go through. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services, is charged with establishing the way Mark's has to maintain, and the city of Lawrence have to maintain your funds, your books, your ledgers, et cetera. There's various reports that Mark is required to submit to the Commonwealth of Mass to get your free cash certified, to do year-end reports, to do the Schedule A, all these other things. So Mark's responsible for all of these and his team to come up and compile that. And then the Single Audit Act that we mentioned earlier also requires an audited financial statement. And so what happens is that bond rating agencies, especially now with interest rates going as they do, depending on where the city's going to borrow, the rating agencies look at these financial statements, and that's really an important element to evaluate the city's financial condition, results of operation, compared to not only every city and town throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it also has to look at it for every city or town throughout the nation to give you a bond rating, AAA, AA, single A, et cetera. And that rating has a lot to do with the rate when you issue a bond, that people will bid on to say, all right, we're going to give you an interest rate of 5% now, where 6 months ago, it may have been 2%, okay? And so it's very important to make sure that you are in good financial condition, and the only way the outside, even the public, can know that is to take what Mark does in here and have an outside auditor come through and basically what our job is to audit all of his numbers. So Mark says we have $80 million worth of cash. Well, we can't just believe them. There's a set of audit procedures that the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants have laid in place that says these are the audit steps that you need to do when you audit cash. This is what you have to do when you audit receivables. This is what you have to do when you audit revenues and expenditures. And we have to then, as part of that, also do a risk assessment and evaluate the internal controls over financial reporting. And so what our audit opinion does is tell the reader, say Standard & Poor's, one of the rating agencies, or the public, anybody potential investment, that these financial statements, in our opinion, comply with generally accepted accounting principles as promulgated for any municipal government in the United States. There's also another oversight board that sets the rules and regulations on how a government reports all of its activity, and that's called the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. So we have to put all of that together to make sure that Mark's financial statements, the city's financial statements, similar to what we did in that single audit report, is in compliance with all of these rules and regulations. And so when we say that these financial statements are in compliance and that the financial statements are fairly stated, people can rely on our audit report that gives them the comfort that what they're looking at are real numbers. Now, it doesn't mean that what we say, saying it's, they're in compliance and we don't have any findings relative to that in our audit report, that these are, say, great numbers. This is a fantastic financial position. All it says is it's accurate. So you can have a clean audit report for this particular statement, but be in terrible financial position. All they want to know is are those funds in these financial statement an accurate representation of your financial position as of June 30th, 21, and the results of operations between the beginning of the year and the end. And so that's our role as we go through. And there's a lot that goes in to get that done. We are here a lot. We go through a lot. Mark's staff does a lot of things as part of getting ready for this particular audit. Go ahead, Counselor.
So now that you mentioned that you're here a lot, so can you walk us through, like perhaps how often you come over to work with Mark? How often your Power and Sullivan interact with the finance department of the city of Lawrence, and so far? Can you give us an overview on that?
Yeah, and so your year end is June 30th. So say at June 30th, 2021, well, what we do is in the springtime beforehand, we get ready and we do a lot of things early on. We'll come out for a week or two in the spring to, in effect, audit things that are ready to be audited now, meaning that, say, long-term debt. If you're not going out for debt anymore, we can audit that before the end of the year, even because we know there's nothing else coming in. We have to do test of transaction and study your internal controls over financial reporting. So we'll probably spend 2 to 3 weeks out early on to do a lot of what we call preliminary work. We go over to the school also to do, because of the single audit piece, they dominate, as I said. They were 26 million out of the 36 that you spend, and so a lot of times we're over at the school doing work there to make sure that that's work is done as part of the overall audit. And then what happens is that we do a lot of planning with Mark and his people as we go through, and realistically, we're in communication throughout the year. I don't think there's a month that goes by that we don't have some communication. A lot of that becomes, say for this year, you got the new ARPA funds in. All right, we did a lot of work with Mark to go through that and how you're going to spend the money, et cetera. So that's part of the audit as we go through. and that he'd rather have things done and that we're in agreement with what the city wants to do with the funds up front, as opposed to us coming in the fall and coming in and coming up with findings. And then what happens over the summer is the city and Mark's team will close the books. They'll go through and say, all right, June 30th is done. Let's make sure that cash is reconciled through the treasurer's office, receivable with the collectors. We have all the information in. We get all the final budget adjustments that may go through the council as you go through. And he closes his books. Once he closes his books and says, Jim, we're ready for you, come in and audit. What they do is, because everything's electronic now, which is great, he will download onto the portal his financial statements, his ledgers, the sub-ledgers, all the other information that we need relative to that. And then we'll come out again, once he's ready for us in the fall, to spend a few weeks in the field, back at the office with several people, to audit the year-end balances, to audit the activity, to audit every other thing and every other piece of these financial statements. And they're pretty comprehensive. Besides just the numbers, which has a lot of numbers in there, there's a lot of notes to the financial statements that Mark puts together that is required information from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and we'll audit that with them. And then we'll work together with him and his team to make sure that the financial statements are the accurate representation. We assisted the city to do this, but it's still Mark's responsibility for the issuance of these financial statements. And so we go over in detail with him, sometimes maybe not in person, but a lot of this is we'll send them information. This is what we have. He'll get us back, and whenever we need to come out and meet, we will do that as part of the process. And if we have any findings, we resolve those with Mark as part of what we'll talk about later in the management letter. So the financial statements are a really comprehensive document, and so we spend weeks and weeks out here. During the pandemic, it got a little bit different, especially the first year, that we had to learn to audit a little bit different because we had to, like these type of meetings, we had to do remotely. We had to social distance and the rest of that. And so that was challenging, but we got it done. And we're getting a little bit, we're probably 75, 80% back to what we had done before. And so there's a lot more on-site work that will happen. Mark, when did you say we're coming out next?
After Labor Day.
After Labor Day. So we'll have a team out here with me and everybody else after Labor Day. And so that's when Mark's books will be closed. But one of the things we also do, councilors, is that just because we're not here, when we get the information, when Mark sends us the ledgers, back at the office, we do what we can do to do a lot of analytical work. We'll get everything coded. We'll make sure the balances tie into the prior year. We can audit what we need to, and then as we go through, we may not be sitting here, but there are things that we can do remotely, but we don't wait till we show up that Monday after Labor Day or Tuesday after Labor Day to jump into the questions. I'd rather be prepared as part of that, give the questions up to Mark up front saying, these are the things we're going to need in addition. He and Ramona, et cetera, can then work on that. So when we walk in the door, we hit the ground running, and it really makes his life a little bit easy as opposed to stopping everything they're doing every time just because the auditors are there. You still have to get out warrants, you still have to get out payrolls, you still have to make deposits, you still have to reconcile. So we try to smooth that over as best as possible. And that's kind of the process as we go through. And then after we're finished, we'll give a draft report of the schedule of federal awards to make sure that Mark and his team can verify that those are the correct federal grants and the expenditures. We'll give him a draft financial statement. And he's responsible for reviewing the documentation to make sure that the numbers tie into his, that he's in agreement with all of these things. And it's kind of a mutual thing that we do in cooperation as we go through the audit to make sure that we are in good shape. And once he gives the approval, Then it goes through another set of review processes back at my office to prove everything, to challenge what we did. So I have another partner, not associated with the job, come in and look at everything. It's called an engagement quality control review. So we want another set of eyes to look at this to make sure that I didn't miss anything as the auditor. And so Renee might be questioning me on, why didn't you do this? This doesn't look right, et cetera. It's just something that we think is a good internal control for our audit process as we go through that. Once that's completed, and most of the audit was done in January last year, it's issued, and then we come before the council afterwards and present the reports to the committee. Does that give you kind of a sense of where we're here? And
Councilors, well, it is important to recognize a few things on the report. The audit report is conducted by, as part of the check and balance for the finance of the city of Lawrence by the city council. And the city council is responsible for that audit as part of our duties and responsibilities, which allow the city to have that important piece, which is the check and balance of government. And with that said, councilors, I open the floor for any questions. But before we actually ask questions, I would like to just walk me through one last thing. When you have any findings,
yep.
In the last couple of years, we haven't found anything, but when we have any findings and you report that, you mentioned that instead of outing 25% for next year, you're going to have the requirement of 40% on those findings, something related to that. Can you walk me through, when you have those findings, how we mitigate those? What is the recommendation, and how that allow the city to have a better finance spectrum, perhaps, for
Okay.
next year?
Okay, so last year, fiscal year '21, we do that study and evaluation of internal controls over financial reporting. We do a lot of testing to make sure that the controls that are in place are actually operating as intended. And if we have any findings related to that, we'll bring those up to management and discuss them, whether or not they're, and there's different levels of finding as you go through. One is what's called an other matter. It's kind of an efficiency point, going through and say, you do this, but you could do a little bit better. All right, it's not going to change, potentially change any of the numbers in your financial statements or any of the numbers in the single audit for the federal grants. And then the next level up is a more serious, go through called a significant deficiency. This is where a combination of errors or lack of internal controls could cause either this schedule of federal awards or the financial statements to have a material misstatement and not go detected on a timely basis through the city's normal internal control processes. So say if it was payroll, there's a set of processes that occur and checks and balances, as you mentioned earlier, that are in place in order to make sure that the payrolls, now, there's always going to be minor errors, but does your system of internal controls catch them on a timely basis and fix them? Those are the things we look at. Those are more significant, and that particular finding, as I stated earlier, is required to be put in the schedule of federal awards, and that's when it would trigger the change from a 25% coverage to a 40%. You did not have that this year, so next year will still be a 25% coverage. And the next thing is a material weakness. And a material weakness is so important to change that the city is at risk that the financial statements could be materially misstated, meaning that you're saying cash is $80 million and it's really $60 million. That type of thing becomes significant. Or even you say it's $80 million and realistically, it's $77 million. $3 million is a big mistake. $3,000 on $80 million is not a big mistake, and that would be another matter. And so that would be something that we would immediately, if we found something, regardless of the timing of the audit, I would request Mark that we would need to come probably before the council to make sure that you have that oversight responsibility and not wait until the end of the year or the end of the audit to find out that there's a significant problem. That's our responsibility. We're independent. We don't work for Mark, okay? We work for you, all right? And so we would be required, based on our ethical requirements, to come up and bring that immediately to your attention. And so that would be, thankfully, we haven't had that issue. We have at other communities, and that's where that would occur. Realistically, the city has a really good system of internal controls and the reporting mechanisms, and the proper authorizations are in place when a warrant is paid, when a payroll is paid. Then you're not well behind in like reconciling cash and receivables, et cetera, as you go through. So all the key elements of internal controls are in place as long as the city, as it's designed, keeps doing what they're doing right now. Things that we'd have to watch out for is, from a risk assessment, is say 1 year, Mark retires. Who replaces him? Who makes sure that everything that's being done is still being done? A key person retires, leaves, new person comes in. We have to, in effect, as part of our audit, evaluate the abilities and the skill sets of that particular person to see whether or not we believe that person possesses sufficient skills to make sure that you continue doing what you've been doing as you go through. So when things like that happen, we change our audit procedures every year. It's not, we don't do the same thing every year. So, but say if Mark left, we would do something different the next year to make sure that we would probably do additional testing on approvals as you go through. We would probably take a little bit more in-depth look at the timing of all the reconciliations that occurred that normally would occur to make sure they still did. And so those are the type of things that are unusual, but are things that change each year. And if you put in a new accounting system, same type of thing, changes the way we do it. You put in a new way, a treasury system or a collecting system, those things require changes to the audit. And we also don't do the same thing every year, even if everything's the same. We don't want our clients to think that, okay, these are the only things that they're going to look at. So if I'm going to do something that's a little shady, I'm going to do it over here because they never test that. We switch that around every year to make sure that we randomly test everything that's either significant or things that aren't as significant to make sure that we're looking at things that need to be looked at. Does that get you to where you need to be on that overview?
Thank you so much. Thank you for all that information, great information. Now I'm going to open the floor to councilors in case they have any question.
Okay.
Councilors? Councilor LaPlante, Council President LaPlante.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, through you. So just I want a nutshell on this. So we talked about material weaknesses, which is what was the highest one again?
Material weakness highest, significant deficiency is a lower level, and then other matters are the third. In the current management letter, they're all other matters.
And how many communities do you do in the Commonwealth?
We do, I think we do about 75 out of the 351.
Out of the 75, how many other communities are like us where all we have are, quote, other matters? Normal thing?
It's a normal thing. Realistically, there's, out of the 75, we probably have 7 to 10 every year that have the material weakness. Significant deficiencies, probably another 10. But most places, as time has gone on, the demand, and the Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services, have put in systems in place where they, won't approve your recap and things like that. And the quality of the people in the treasurer's office and the accounting office and the collecting office and assessing has improved over the years to meet up with the new automation that's occurred. And the new systems, things used to be manual all the time. And there's only so many different software programs that are out there that are being used by, there's probably 6 or 7 that dominate with the 351. And there's user groups, they've designed their systems where you really can't get into the coding, and once you put it in, it's there, so there's a lot of good things. The biggest thing that we look at as part of this, from a control standpoint, everything in a city and town that's important kind of revolves around cash. That's the most risky element because people pay their taxes with cash. People get paid with cash, not cash itself, you know what I mean, for the cash and investments. And there are very good controls in most communities surrounding that. Every year we do find, there's probably about 5 or 6 fraudulent events. Sometimes they've been at like the treasurer's office, accounting office. That's rare, that's every few years. Not here in Lawrence, no.
Now I want to
Yeah.
focus on Lawrence, and I want to make this brief if we can, which is this. Once we finish our discussion this evening, I feel like I'm walking away from this chamber thinking, okay, we're doing a pretty good job as a city. It seems like the controls are in place. It seems as though that the accountant that we as city council have paid for have reviewed the books and have said to the CPA's satisfaction that everything is accountable and that the processes are in place where the public monies are coming in and these things are being spent in a way that is appropriate and fitting of a city of our size.
Yes.
That's what I'm walking away from in my words. Is that?
That's,
is that what I should be walking-
that's an accurate description of what we came out with that.
Okay.
One of the more important things as part of that also, Counselor, is that we audit kind of at year end, but we also take a look at what happens during the year. And so the information and the financial information you're getting from Mark's office, when we study an evaluation, is an accurate representation of what's happening during the year that you can get on a timely basis. So if you get say a revenue report with revenue projections through the year or an appropriation report out of the general fund, you know that that's an accurate representation of where you are at that point in time. And so if you need to make a financial decision because, say during the pandemic, revenues had slowed down in a lot of communities, that if you had to adjust the level of appropriation and spending, you have accurate information to make an intelligent decision on what needs to occur.
Mr. Powers, my time is running short. I just have one very quick question. I see 4 comments in the last one, which is the management letter, and these are the comments that these are things that we should be looking at as a city, but they don't rise to the significant level.
No.
So out of these 4, and I realize they're relatively minor.
Right.
Which of these 4 would you highlight to say, listen, they're minor right now, but keep an eye on it. If we don't keep a close eye on it, it could be more serious. Which one of these 4 would you classify in that?
The water and sewer reconciliations were important, and I believe Mark has worked on that, and that has been reconciled for the year, and there's a new process in place to do that. It wasn't that it was off a great deal, but that's one of those important internal controls. If that was significantly off, this would have risen up to a significant deficiency, but it's not there. And the other pieces as you go through, the other one was just some old credit balances and receivables. The first one that, some going back to 96, that just needed a cleanup on some receivables. Abandoned property tailings, that's money that you may know for people that never cashed a check from the city. That's easy to clean up. It's just going through all the legacy. And the last thing, the capital asset reporting, that gets into the reporting that every community in the nation have to do. And we're just saying automate this a little bit better. We didn't find anything wrong, but there's a lot easier way and more efficient way to do it. And we just think it's a good thing to do. So those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Powers.
Thank you, Council President LaPlante. There is any other questions?
No, my question were completely answered.
All right, no problem. So we have complete the set of questioning that we have at this point. Thank you for that overview summary and the reports. And councilors, I believe that we should send this out to the full council for further review and eventually acceptance of the audit. So I probably look for a motion.
Second.
Make a motion that we send this up to the full council.
What motion? I'm sorry. So motion to send it to the full council for fully review and with fully recommendation.
There is a motion on the table, sending it to the full council with acceptable recommendation, perhaps, for lack of a better word. And can you hear a second?
Second, and a quick discussion.
Second with discussion.
So just so we're clear, so we're sending this up to the council. We're not approving or disapproving. This is merely the findings of the audit that we've just received. And the full council may or may not, depending on the council's wishes, wish to maybe ask more questions, may not ask questions, whatever, but available, right, Mr. Arnello? So, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So the motion is to send it to the full council as a committee report.
Second.
All right, now the motion has been changed, and we're gonna be sending this item, if passes, to present it to the full council as a committee report for further discussion, in case councilors have any other questions. So with that said, I call the roll call. Councilor LaPlante,
Yes.
Councilor Levy,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
And I see you on the next meeting.
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, the 2nd. Hopefully you can be here so we can have further discussion.
Tuesday, I'll see if I can change my schedule around a little bit, but I'll let Mark know, but I'll try to
Thank you,
be here.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilors, there is any other item, there is no new item on that, so with that said, without further search, I'm looking for a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, there is a motion on the table to adjourn. I call the roll call. Councilor LaPlante,
Yes.
Councilor Levy,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Thank you so much.